Alright everybody, we're back with another compilation style video, this one being every time there was an egregiously bad umpire miss during the 2025 season. As I like saying anytime I do something where I put together previously released videos, there will probably be certain narratives laid out that didn't age the best, but that shouldn't affect the actual plays/calls themselves, which exist in a relative vacuum. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and have a happy Thanksgiving everybody. Which, for those watching later, is when I'm releasing this. I know one thing I'm personally grateful for is the implementation of ABS league-wide starting in 2026. Laz Diaz had a heartwarming moment earlier this year when he outright apologized to an MLB player for missing a call, screwing up this pitch away to Christian Campbell before saying, "Hey, that's on me. That's on me." This was a welcome departure from the egotistical reactions you normally see from Major League umps, but unfortunately, today's video will not be complimentary to Diaz, as he just made, verifiably, the worst call in recorded Major League history. The Rangers were facing the Rays in a 1-0 game with Jake Mangum at the plate versus Tyler Mahle. The AB started with a perfectly placed sinker low and away, fouled off down the third baseline. Mahle then continued to dot locations. On the 0-2, we would see Tyler try a changeup and miss badly away, or at least you would think this would be a bad miss, right? But I'm not so sure based on what we saw in the next offering, as on the 1-2, Mangum had to watch as Diaz called him out on a slider that really wasn't all that far off from the previous pitch, not even in the same area code for strike 3. Just look at that. That almost touched the chalk of the right-handed batter's box. One of my favorite umpire grading accounts, Umpire Auditor, would then come out with the revelation last night that this indeed was the worst called strike 3 in recorded history, as it missed outside by 6.83 inches, literally over half a foot. This broke the previous record held by Angel Hernandez at 6.78 inches. To his credit, at least Laz didn't blow the prior two calls like Angel did. Now, for those that want to dispute me saying recorded history, keep in mind that Umpire Auditor has been doing this literally since before the invention of StatCast, so any call that can be properly measured has indeed gone through their system. And yeah, I do personally think there's a high chance that the iconic Eric Gregg game probably featured worse calls, but those aren't able to be measured in the same exact nature as the ones in our modern era, so they aren't admissible for consideration, in the same way a hard hit ball from Barry Bonds can't be considered for exit velocity records. To miss a call like Laz did to Campbell is one thing, especially with his reaction afterwards, as every ump makes mistakes once in a while, but this is just flat out inexcusable in comparison. To miss a call as consequential as a strike 3 on an offering over half a foot off the strike zone is just plain ridiculous, and it turns out record-setting in the most dubious way possible. Bad calls on the bases have largely gone the way of the dinosaurs, being eliminated by the replay review system instituted league-wide way back in 2014. In my opinion, this has been one of the most positive developments in terms of changes since MLB started examining their rulebook, right up there with the pitch clock and the catcher collision rules. But because of the way the replay system is laid out, it is still possible to see one of these ostentatious misses once in a while, and we just witnessed the worst one in quite some time yesterday, in a game between the Rays and Orioles. In order to properly set up what went down, we have to go back to the very beginning of this contest, when Jackson Holliday led off the night with a walk. Just one pitch later, starter Ryan Pepiot would spin and pick over to first base, with Holliday managing to just get back in ahead of the tag. Or did he? The Rays weren't convinced and decided to go ahead and challenge this call. It was too close to overturn in New York's opinion, meaning that the play would stand and the Rays would, consequentially, lose their challenge. Following a strikeout for Adley Rutschman, Holliday would end up getting thrown out in the bases anyway, when Gunnar Henderson lined a ball hard to Brandon Lau, who made a nice leaping catch before flipping behind the young second baseman to get him. The player who will end up being our titular character, Josh Lau, would lead off the bottom of the first with a towering fly ball to right field that just carried over the fence. A Mickey Mouse home run, but one that still counted as his first career leadoff bomb. After Pepiot retired the side in order in the top of the second, the Rays would get a little something cooking in the bottom of the inning, with Jake Mangum beating out a weakly hit ground ball to second base, then Danny Jansen crushing a sinker into center field. Now with runners on first and third, Christopher Morel would surprise the Orioles by dropping down a bunt on a 2-1 count that got just past Zach Eflin, going into the books as an RBI single. But the Rays weren't satisfied here, specifically with trying to bunt for hits, as Lau would come up and immediately attempt to do the same thing, dropping a near-perfect bunt down the third baseline that Ramon Urias came in on, firing to first late, yet still seeing umpire Bruce Dreckman call Lau out. Josh then turned around after realizing what had happened and said to Dreckman, "You missed that one. You missed that one bad. You missed that one bad." Kevin Cash couldn't believe it either, and both would be vindicated after examining the replay. Look at how clear this call should have been. He was safe by maybe 4 or 5 feet of airtime on that throw. But because Tampa Bay lost their challenge just one inning before, they couldn't do anything about this abomination of a miss except complain, which they certainly did. To Dreckman's credit, he didn't eject either of them for their fiery outbursts, which I guess is something.
Thankfully, this didn't end up having a consequential impact on the game as a whole, as Pepio would go on to have an excellent start, striking out 11 guys through 8 innings of 1-run ball, while the Rays offense pushed across another 5 runs. Former Astros top prospect Forrest Whitley would then come on and retire the side 1-2-3 in the 9th, ending the game on a pop-up to the shortstop.
Javier Baez has had one hell of a comeback season so far for the Tigers, slashing .286, .321, .468, with a .122 OPS plus and 16 extra base hits in just 45 games, in comparison to 18 and 80 last year. What's more, he's been absolutely elite defensively, with a fielding run value in the 82nd percentile at 3 to go along with 0.4 D-WAR. I say all this to preface that he probably isn't in a trigger-happy place right now where he'd be willing to get ejected at the drop of a hat, perhaps giving some insight as to why he was so furious upon getting ejected during yesterday's game, probably being the angriest we've ever seen him on a baseball field. It was in the 5th inning of a 1-0 ball game when Hayden Birdsong delivered this nasty curveball below the zone, only to see it get called strike 3. Now, for a guy who's been prone to swinging at pitches like this for years now, having this called against him had to be especially frustrating, which seemingly resulted in him saying something to Phil Cuzzy as he was leaving the box. Apparently, this was too far for the home plate ump, who then booted the veteran righty. This sent Baez into an absolute rage, having to be restrained by Gleyber Torres and Joey Cora with everything they had to not allow him to get close to the game caller, who was then actively in conversation with manager AJ Hinch. Just look at how frustrated he is here. You rarely see players get that heated. And the replay really does justify how bad of a call this was. But it turns out after the game, when asked about the whole situation, it wasn't even the call that Javi was the most frustrated with, saying, quote, "I only said, I'm looking for that pitch. It's not a bleeping strike. That's the only thing I said." And then he said, "Don't point at it. Walk out." And then I said, "What do you mean walk out? I'm asking you something." And then he just threw me out. It's funny to see this kind of umpire pride issue just a few days after one of the cooler moments we saw this season in the exact opposite direction, when Laz Diaz literally apologized for missing a call in a similar spot as the one to Baez. I think we'd all love to see a little bit more of that, and a little bit less of quick trigger Phil over here, who robbed Javier of what would have been only his 6th walk of the year so far.
Yesterday was the most important day of the San Diego Padres season, Game 3 of the wild card round, and it did not go how they would have wanted, with them ending up losing by a final score of 3-1. But this wasn't without some controversy, as in the 9th inning, in a key at-bat, they got absolutely screwed. But that's not all I want to discuss, being their reaction afterward as well, when they seemed like they actually wanted to fight the home plate umpire post-game. Yu Darvish was on the hill versus Jameson Taillon in a matchup of veteran righties who've made more than their fair share of postseason starts. Things got started fast in this one when, with 2 outs, Pete Crow Armstrong robbed Manny Machado of a hit on a sliding grab, a ball with a catch probability around 10%, with him making it look way easier than that. Things would remain quiet offensively until the bottom of the 2nd, when Chicago loaded the bases with nobody out, bringing PCA to the plate now, and he delivered, lining a middle-cut fastball to center field, which was somehow the first hit the Cubs had registered with runners in scoring position in the entire series. They wouldn't have to wait long for their second tally, as Jeremy Estrada, who entered the game in relief of a struggling Yu, walked his first batter, Dansby Swanson, on a 3-2 slider, but to Estrada's credit, he wouldn't let things get out of control, retiring the next guy before getting Michael Busch to bounce into an inning-ending double play. From here, the Swanson show defensively would get started, with him first making this play in the top of the 4th to rob Luis Arraez, deflecting a ball at the apex of his leap before firing to first just in time to get the veteran hitter. The San Diego offense would continue to struggle despite registering some opportunities, including in the top of the 5th when, with runners on 2nd and 3rd and 2 outs, Fernando Tatis Jr. flew out to shallow right. Arraez would get robbed for the 2nd time in as many at-bats at the hands of Dansby in the 6th, with the shortstop sliding up the middle, frustrating Arraez to no end afterwards. The Padres would then strand Xander Bogaerts at 2nd in the 7th with some help from another middle infielder, Nico Horner, making a leaping catch on a line drive. This meant when Michael Busch went deep in the bottom of that frame, their cushion had grown to 3-0. San Diego seemed dead in the water, as entering the 9th they'd gotten nothing on the board, but this is when they would muster some fight, when Jackson Merrill led off the frame with a home run that just snuck over the right field fence, bringing them within 2. This brings us to our highlighted moment, when Xander Bogaerts worked a 3-2 count only to see a Brad Keller four-seamer dip well below the zone, yet still get called strike 3, outright robbing the Padres of a base runner. Even the ESPN announcer in this moment pointed out how much the Padres had gotten screwed.
Not a strike. And honestly, a great take. This is a full count take below the zone. To be able to spit on this pitch is a great at bat. He should be on first base. That is not close.
And the heartache would get even worse after Keller hit back-to-back batters, departing for Andrew Kittredge, who managed to retire Jake Cronenworth on a ground ball to Matt Shaw by mere inches at first base, then inducing a fly ball to center field off the bat of Freddie Fermin, sending San Diego home, and certainly with a bad taste in their mouth. This became even more clear when, as the umpires went to depart the field, a couple Padres players, being who people think is Jose Iglesias and Xander Bogaerts, got in their faces and even proceeded to make physical contact with the field ump while trying to get at Rayburn, looking like they were angling to get into some sort of fight with him. That's as angry as you'll ever see MLB players get at a call, but based on the impact of the miss, I can't say I blame them all that much. There's been a couple really bad calls I've detailed over the last couple months, including one that was record-breaking for the worst called strike three in cataloged baseball history. On this pitch to rookie Jake Mangum, a startling 6.83 inches outside the strike zone. But it was yesterday that we saw the inverse of this, an umpire calling a pitch basically right down the middle of the ball, but with this one costing a pitcher a chance at history. Yoshinobu Yamamoto was on the mound to start the third inning, down 1-0 to the Padres, when Bryce Johnson stepped up to the plate, taking a fastball perfectly painted over the low and outside corner for strike one. The Japanese righty would then flip his nasty curveball up there, seeing it hit the bat of Johnson twice in one swing. Certainly an odd-looking play. Yoshi then got back on the mound and punched out the 29-year-old with a nasty backdoor curveball. 1, 2, 3, and the first out of the inning. Next up was veteran backstop Martin Maldonado, with the veteran flying the first pitch of his at-bat down the right side. He then took a backup slider over the inside corner, with the umpire actually doing a good job of tracking it considering that Will Smith wasn't expecting it there, pushing the count to 0-2. Yoshinobu would then ramp up and throw a 96-mile-per-hour heater right past Maldonado, again setting him down 1-2-3. This brought leadoff man Fernando Tatis Jr. to the plate, easily the toughest customer of the inning. But his at-bat started like the other two, with a strike this time on a swing and miss at a cutter low. Nando then fouled off a near-perfectly placed slider right at the plate, putting Yoshi one pitch away from an immaculate inning. One of the rare accomplishments any pitcher can tally. So he got back on the mound, wound up, and fired another mid-90s heater, this time basically right down the middle. But for some inexplicable reason, it wasn't called. The only justification I can even possibly come up with was that Smith actually framed it a little higher for some reason, but it still would have been a strike in that spot at the top of the zone anyway. And the impact of this missed call certainly wasn't lost on Dodgers announcer Joe Davis.
Here's the 0-2. It is! Oh no! Marvin Hudson cost him an immaculate inning!
Keep in mind, in the whole of Major League Baseball history, an immaculate inning has only been thrown 118 times. For little reference, there have been 309 no-hitters. To see Yoshi lose this historic accomplishment to one of the worst called strike misses you will ever see just felt horrible to watch, almost like a mini version of the Armando Galarraga 27th out. But disappointment aside, this wouldn't really affect the current Dodgers ace, who would get right back on the mound and miss with a curveball low before setting Tatis down anyway on a nasty cutter. And while this start wasn't his best, as he gave up 3 runs through 6 1/3 innings, it was still solid enough for him to get a victory. But in keeping with the trend that has been following him all season, the Dodgers just couldn't muster any offense behind him, not managing to score their first run until the 9th inning, with a bunch of hit-by-pitch shenanigans being in there as well. Dalton Rushing would then strike out with the tying run on second base to end the game, meaning that, as of today, Yoshinobu has a 2.76 ERA, 95 Ks in 84 2/3 innings, a 1.42 ERA+, and yet a 6-6 record somehow. One of the things that usually comes with a bad call is essentially an acceptance from the team and broadcasting crew that benefited, with them usually staying quiet courtesy of the fact that everyone has calls that both go against them and for them at different times. But there have been a few circumstances where the calls were so egregious that even the opposing broadcasters have been mortified by it, and we just got a recent example of this in a game between the A's and Mets. Jose Leclerc was on the mound versus New York in the top of the 8th, down by 3 runs. After retiring the first batter on a weak ground ball back to the mound, Tyrone Taylor would lace a fastball deep to right, a ball that would end up getting just over the head of Lawrence Butler, who probably didn't take the best angle on it, resulting in a runner being on third base with just 1 out. It would be then that on a 0-1 count to the next batter, Luis Angel Acuna, Leclerc would pick towards third base, probably trying to keep Taylor close, but almost immediately the umpire at third signaled a balk, prompting this response from the Mets broadcasting crew.
And a pickoff try at third. It picked off the third baseman. Urshela was not there, and they call a balk. It's a balk. It's not a balk. It's not a balk. I think they're saying because Urshela wasn't holding the bag. That's a bad call by Nick Marley, I think.
If you didn't already know that that was the away broadcast, you probably could be easily convinced that those were Oakland's play-by-play guys because of how mortified they were instantaneously. And I totally understand why. While it was theorized that the umpires called this because the third baseman wasn't close enough to the bag, I struggle to see where that was true, as he literally only had to take 2 steps to get within reach of potentially tagging the runner. And yeah, while he may not have looked like he was the most aware, that could have totally been part of the play. You just can't know for sure. Either way, this wouldn't go on to matter all that much, considering that Acuna would single later on in the AB, and the Mets overall would knock in a few more additional runs before finally ending the game 8-0. Still, like I said, it is rare when you have opposing announcers rallying against calls that benefit their team, so I thought it was worth pointing out. Now, I want to know what you guys think. Should this have been a balk, or do you agree with the Mets broadcasters that it was a bad call? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Usually when you see especially bad games from umpires, there's going to be one team who ends up getting extremely frustrated. As while tension can certainly build for each, there almost always is a point where something gives and a certain player or coach gets ejected, and from here tensions will largely settle down. But there are rare cases where an umpire performs so poorly that both teams end up getting outwardly frustrated with them in the same contest. And that's exactly what we saw yesterday with Andy Fletcher behind the plate in a game between the Mariners and Nationals. Before we get to our first major explosion, let's explore the bad calls that he had made leading up to that point. First, calling this pitch away to Randy Arozarena a strike in the bottom of the first, before doing the same to Luis Garcia Jr. at the top of the second. Both of these were bad, but not necessarily standout. The first bit of pressure that would mount from the Mariners side, in my opinion, would come in the third, when he missed this pitch high to J.P. Crawford that would have made the count 3-0, while also seeing Leody Taveras get tagged out stealing. Fletcher would then miss 3 more calls over the next 3 innings, on pitches that were, for the most part, nowhere close. This brings us to our first moment of real outward frustration, as J.P. Crawford, up now with runners on first and third and nobody out, took this fastball well away in an 0-2 count, yet still saw it be called strike 3. This infuriated the lefty, kicking off a passionate outburst that resulted in his ejection, while simultaneously registering one of the more fiery exchanges we've seen yet this season. And this call would certainly prove consequential, as the Mariners would go on to leave both runners on without being able to score. It was literally in the bottom of the following inning that things started to get heated for the Nationals as well, as on the second pitch of Jorge Lopez's appearance, he would dot a fastball high and inside, only to see it be called a ball. The hitter, Miles Mastrobuoni, would end up taking a walk before Rowdy Tellez would come to the plate, taking an even more clear strike over the inner half for yet another ball. This caused Lopez to start jawing at Fletcher, angering the home plate umpire so much so that he started trying to head out to the mound to yell at the reliever, only being settled down somewhat after catcher Keibert Ruiz got in front of him. After things settled down a little bit, Tellez would dig back in before taking essentially the exact same pitch in the same spot for a strike. This irritated Rowdy, who more than likely was griping about the lack of consistency for the strike zone, which is many times what hitters dislike. They just want to know what the zone is that night so they can adjust accordingly, and if it changes constantly, that's highly frustrating. From here, the Mariners would go on to tie the contest on some clutch hitting, with Ben Williamson coming through with a 2-out game-tying knock. Then, after a game-saving throw from Leody Taveras in the top of the 8th, nothing much would happen until the top of the 10th, when the Nationals would absolutely break out, scoring 7 runs, with their rally being punctuated by a 3-run homer. 1 inning and a single meaningless run later for the M's, and the Nats had emerged victorious, 9-3, putting a pin in one of the most contentiously umpired games we've seen yet this year.
We see bad calls in the field all the time, including a litany of examples I've detailed personally over the last couple months, and these certainly each had the potential to be highly consequential. But they often don't directly lead to 2 runs in the moment that they're made, right? That's actually hard to do on a single call. But, funny enough, that's exactly what we just saw in a game between the Rockies and Dodgers, when Colorado, who's already struggling like few teams ever have before, got absolutely screwed by that night's crew. But let's set the stage before we get there. Young righty Chase Dollander is on the mound facing off against LA's star-studded lineup that includes multiple Hall of Famers, and probably a couple Hall of pretty good players as well. Comment below if you get that reference. And to make matters worse, Chase himself had struggled up to this point, with an ERA over 6 during his rookie campaign. But in this contest, for the first 5 innings, he was seemingly impossible to barrel up, as despite only striking out 1 batter, he hadn't given up a run to this point. Opposing him was Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who's actually one of those players I briefly referenced before who got screwed by a bad call. And like I mentioned at the end of that video, he also hasn't gotten any real run support through the first half of the season. And the same trend would continue in this game, being that he was just as good as advertised, striking out 6 hitters through 5 innings while only giving up 2 base runners, while also receiving 0 runs in support through the game's first half. This takes us to the top of the 6th inning, when Dollander first walked Dalton Rushing on a 3-2 fastball, then gave up a first pitch knock to Shohei Ohtani. All of a sudden, there were 2 guys on with nobody out, which you'd think would be major trouble, but Mookie Betts would fly out to left field before Freddie Freeman grounded a ball to first base, a play that usually gets turned into a DP, but because Michael Toglia bobbled it briefly, they had to settle for an out at first. This meant that they were 1 out away from getting out of the frame completely. It was at this point any rain that had been coming down seemed to get multiplied by 1,000 during Max Muncy's at-bat, with the Colorado coaching staff repeatedly asking if the weather was too much to keep playing in. And just look at this downpour, they were 100% in the right here.
But regardless, the umpiring crew for some reason said play on, probably hoping the inning would end and they'd get to start fresh from the delay in the bottom of the 6th. And this ended up backfiring in a major way, as on a 3-2 pitch, Muncy would pop a ball on the infield. But because nobody could see it due to the amount of rain coming down, it ended up almost plunking Tolia in the head as it sailed down from the heavens. To me, it's just embarrassing. There's no way you should be expected to track pop-ups in weather like that. But here's where it gets especially insulting. They literally suspended play immediately after this. Like, right after this. Why not have done it earlier when it got really bad? It is 100% a normal thing to do to suspend play mid-at-bat if players can't see anymore, for safety reasons if nothing else. You can see Dolander's reaction here as well coming off the field. He was justifiably furious. This not only led to those 2 runs scoring for LA, but it also set up the Dodgers for another run when both teams came back to play, as Jake Bird would give up a flare single to Andy Pages to make it 3-0. There would be no redeeming the game for Colorado, as they would go on to give up a grand slam to Muncy in the top of the 7th, then a moonshot to struggling veteran Michael Conforto in the 8th, eventually losing this one by a final score of 8-1 after a 1-2-3 ninth, dropping their record to 18-62 through the season's first 80 games. The Yankees have gotten absolutely shut down their last 2 games versus Boston, losing today by a final score of 12-1 and yesterday 1-0. But it was during the latter contest specifically that I wanted to point to one of the more unfair at-bats of the entire season, when we saw one of the biggest superstars in the entire game get called out looking, despite not seeing a single legitimate pitch in the strike zone. That might seem hard to believe, but bear with me here. Aaron Judge was at the plate with 1 out and a guy on in the bottom of the 1st inning, taking a first pitch slider a bit low from Brian Bayo. He would then see a sinker low and outside, get called for a strike. But even then, that wasn't an egregious miss, right? But the next one would arguably be a bit worse, when Bayo basically repeated the first pitch, only to see this one get called. And then the off-kilter nature of this at-bat was cemented when Aaron took a changeup off the inside corner to end his at-bat entirely. Now, there are bad calls made that are worse than this all the time, but to see 3 missed strikes in a row in a series this big to a star player certainly isn't a good look, and it arguably got even worse after Judge took this sinker well inside to lead off the 7th. What's more, this has been part of a recurring theme for Judge, who, since his full season debut in 2017, has seen 627 pitches out of the strike zone get called strikes on him, the most in that time frame, with the only other player anywhere close being Mookie Betts. However, over that span, Betts has also played 60 more games than Aaron, with over 400 more at-bats. Crazy stuff, and the kind of stat that really makes you believe he's going to be jumping for joy once ABS gets implemented. As for the rest of the game, like I mentioned before, the New York offense wouldn't manage to get anything going, en route to scoring exactly 0 runs, while the Red Sox managed to push 1 across in the 7th. And now the Yankees' loss today makes them just 1-8 versus their biggest historical rival on the season. Now, before this video ends, I wanted to do a little mini-segment congratulating Shane Bieber on a dominant return to the mound, as in yesterday's game versus the Marlins, he went 6 innings while giving up just 2 hits, 1 run, 0 walks, and striking out 9 hitters in his first big league action in almost 17 months. A healthy Bieber is not only good for Toronto, but for baseball overall, and it's awesome seeing him back out there dicing up hitters with the best of them. Trey Savage made his major league debut yesterday in what was one of the most impressive first appearances we've ever seen from a Toronto Blue Jay, striking out a franchise record 9 batters while giving up just 3 hits, 2 walks, and 1 earned run. All night he was pinpointing his exceptional fastball and allowing his nasty AA+ splitter to work off of that, all from the highest arm angle in MLB. But he also had something happen during this appearance that was certainly unfortunate, which was pointed out to me in an email from Brandon R., as he was robbed of a chance at baseball history, all because of a blown strike call. Savage was in the 4th inning of his outing, facing Josh Lowe leading off. The lefty would take a first pitch splitter right down the middle, before hacking and missing at a fastball. Trey would then dispatch him on a diving slider in the dirt. 1, 2, 3. Next up was rookie Jake Mangum, a player who's currently striking out and whiffing at rates above the 80th percentile this season. Yet, he too would be powerless in his at-bat, taking a pinpointed fastball, then swinging at a splitter in the exact same spot. Another nearly perfectly placed off-speed pitch would dispatch him on a wild hack. Again, 1, 2, 3. Then it was catcher Nick Fortes's turn to hit, and he promptly took a heater right down the middle for strike 1. Our complicating incident would occur on the 0-1, as Savage got screwed when he dotted another 4-seamer a full ball's length inside the strike zone, yet still didn't get the call from notoriously inconsistent ump Laz Diaz. This ruined his run of 7 straight strikes to start the frame, but he was undeterred, coming back with a nasty splitter that would have officially sealed history. It would only take one more offering to dispatch Fortes, another elite split piece for a swing and miss. This was his first career inning where he managed to strike out the side in order, so I guess that's something, but it is a real bummer he didn't even get a chance at registering the 118th Immaculate inning in baseball history. A feat, by the way, that's actually far more rare than a no-hitter even, with that one coming in at a tally of 326. The Blue Jays would go on to win this contest in 11 innings by a final score of 2-1, seeing fellow rookie Braden Fisher twice work out of big spots with strikeouts, including on a game-ending slider to low, a performance that, along with Savage, helped push Toronto's lead to a solid 5 games over the Yankees in the season's final days. If you've been following my channel this season, you've probably seen me make quite a few videos on individually missed calls by umpires, whether that be on balls and strikes, calls in the field, or even weather-based decisions. In every one of these circumstances, the moment I was describing was defined by a single bad miss, with varying levels of consequence to the game overall. But yesterday, we witnessed something we haven't seen all year. An umpire not only make a terrible call that was game-changing, but 3 of them in a row that largely contributed to a loss for the Phillies. Before we get there, let's work our way through the contest as a whole, which featured some truly odd defense, including on the first run of the game, when Christopher Sanchez induced a routine ground ball to shortstop Trey Turner, in DP that went off his glove, yet still somehow managed to dribble to second base for an out. This would allow Philadelphia to escape otherwise unscathed, but in the very next frame it was a similar story, this time on a pop-up into shallow right field that Bryson Stott and Nick Castellanos ended up unsuccessfully converging on, allowing another easy play to turn into a free base for the hitter, this time being Rafael Devers. And wouldn't you know it, just 2 batters later, Matt Chapman would send a deep fly ball to center field, a play that Brandon Marsh probably makes 99 times out of 100, but not on this one, when it got past an awkward, twisting, turning, diving attempt before bouncing over the wall, mercifully saving a run in the process. Sanchez, despite all of this unearned traffic, managed to continue to pitch brilliantly, ending that frame on a strikeout of Wilmer Flores to keep the damage to just 1. Meaning that when this ground ball from Bryson Stott took a crazy hop on Wilmer Flores and got down the right field line, the tying run was at second with nobody out in the 5th. He was eventually cashed in on a wild pitch from Cameron Roop, knotting us up at 1. Christopher would go on to complete 7 innings of 1-run ball a couple frames later, ending his night on a strikeout of Devers. It's important to note that during this time, the Phillies would see a number of calls go against their hitters, with the biggest misses coming against Bryce Harper, when 2 pitches out of the strike zone were called against him. However, these wouldn't be even close to the most consequential calls of the game. No, it wouldn't be until the 8th inning, after Nick Castellanos stranded a runner at second base, that things would really get out of hand, with reliever Orion Kirkring plunking Willy Adames on a 2-1 slider, putting a runner at first with nobody out. This brought Matt Chapman to the plate, who quickly got down 0-2 after called strikes on another breaking ball and perfectly placed fastball. This brings us to our run of 3 consecutive consequential misses, with the first one being right over the high and outside corner. And while it was a strike, I will admit it maybe could be considered a 50-50 ball, right? It wasn't an especially terrible miss from umpire Phil Cuzzi. But you couldn't say the same about the next one, however, which was perfectly placed over the low and outside corner, basically the same pitch as strike 2. Kirkring would shake it off, get back on the mound, and then deliver a 2-2 in exactly the same spot, which somehow elicited the same call. That was 3 pitches that were all considered strikes by our current definition of the zone being called balls, with the last 2 being nearly 100% in the strike zone box. This is just inexcusable, and would quickly come back to bite the Phillies when Chapman, who had now taken 5 strikes in this at-bat, proceeded to foul off a tough pitch before grounding a fastball into right field, putting runners on the corners with nobody out. And there would be no recovering from this predicament for Philadelphia, who would see Wilmer Flores get drilled by a breaking ball before Casey Schmidt grounded a fielder's choice up the middle. Jung-Hoo Lee would do the same thing to first baseman Bryce Harper, the end result of which being a 2-run deficit going into the 9th inning, one they would not be able to make up when Bryson Stott grounded into a game-ending double play, sealing what was a pretty frustrating loss for Philadelphia, as one of my favorite Twitter accounts, Umpire Scorecards, came out after the game with their report that Cuzzi cost them approximately 1.5 runs directly because of his misses, most notably in that game-changing at-bat in the 8th inning. Juan Soto has certainly had an up and down 2025 by his standards, going through stretches where he looked like a top 3 hitter in the game, and then others that had general baseball fans already labeling him a bust. But one thing that has stayed the same through it all is his exceptional eye, which has helped him post a walk rate right in line with his career average, around 18%. It's this context of how good his pitch recognition is that makes what happened to him yesterday especially insulting, when he saw a number of egregious misses on pitches outside the zone, and then had to witness as second-year umpire Emil Jimenez stared him down from behind the plate after the last one. The frustrating misses would actually begin on his very first pitch saw of the night, with this 99-mile-per-hour fastball well high being called a strike. See that small amount of exasperation in his body language? A couple pitches later, he would strike out on a well-located slider, but this was only the start of his feud with Jimenez. Because, you see, in his second at-bat, he would see this pitch be called a strike well away, an even bigger miss than the first one, turning what would have been a 3-1 count into a 2-2. Then, just 2 pitches later, he would strike out on a breaking ball in a similar spot, though it does seem that this one grazed the outside corner. The Mets manager, Carlos Torres, would come out of the dugout and help save Soto from getting ejected by himself getting booted. His next at-bat would come in the 5th inning with zero controversy, seeing him beat out a potential double play en route to New York, eventually taking the lead in the ball game 5-1 on a grand slam off the bat of Mark Vientos, who had been robbed of a home run earlier in the contest by Tatis Jr. in right. However, by the time Juan came up in his next at-bat in the 7th, his team had actually gotten down 6-5 after a couple rallies from the Padres. This brings us to the moment I outlined in the intro, when, on an 0-2 pitch, Jimenez called Soto out on a cutter well above the strike zone. This elicited another exasperated look afterwards, as Emil proceeded to stare the superstar down on his way out of the box, maintaining eye contact all the way until Soto broke it. To have that level of confidence in the call you made, with it being that far out of the strike zone, as a second-year ump, is certainly interesting to me, and might have even in some ways been impressive if not for the obviously missed call immediately before. Further exacerbating the frustration for the Mets had to be the fact that they would go on to lose this game after tying it up on a clutch home run from rookie Ronnie Mauricio in the 9th. Having to watch his recent acquisition Gregory Soto gave up a walk-off single on a fastball right down the middle of the plate, keeping NY's lead at just a game and a half over the Phillies. My little mini section of this video was going to concern Rich Hill getting cut by the Royals yesterday after giving up 4 runs in 4 innings, with 6 walks and 3 strikeouts. This most recent stint with Kansas City actually tied an MLB record, with him appearing for 14 different major league teams. And his next, if he ends up making one with a squad he hasn't already pitched for, would indeed be the new high-water mark, surpassing his current mark co-owned by Edwin Jackson. On the surface, you might look at yesterday's score between the Mariners and Blue Jays and think, yeah, this was a pretty decided rout. Probably not that much to write home about in terms of narrative. A plain and simple beatdown. But if you dug a little bit beneath the surface, you'd find one storyline that emerged throughout the contest that actually united both fan bases. Umpire Doug Eddings was absolutely horrible, and per one of the big umpire evaluators in the space, the worst we'd seen since 2022, missing 24 separate calls. From literally the first inning, you could see some pretty big misses, including on what should have been a strike to Randy Arozarena that was so clearly in the zone that Randy himself started walking back to the dugout after taking it. That's not how you want the first batter of the game to go, though I guess perhaps it might have been a makeup pitch, as the very first offering of that night had been called a strike even though it was well inside. And so we went, with not only call after call being missed on both sides, but with no degree of consistency. Up, down, left, right. It was like this iconic Max Scherzer clip where he did the flipping coin motion. There were, however, some that were worse than others, like when this perfectly painted fastball over the low and outside corner was called a ball, despite it being almost fully in the strike zone, allowing Nathan Lucas later on to tie the game at the time. To these back-to-back strike calls with 2 outs in the 9th that were nowhere close. Like I said, there was no bias, just all-around buffoonery. When the night finally ended, Umpire Auditor, an account that does such things on Twitter, evaluated his performance as having missed 24 separate calls, the worst we'd seen since Eddings himself back in 2022. Umpire Scorecards was a bit kinder, only attributing 17 missed calls to him, though this was, notably, still 2 worse than the other horrible performance I called out earlier in the postseason from Alex Tosi. I also found it funny that general baseball fans seemed to discover one of his other notable quirks. The guy will not let catchers throw foul balls back to the pitcher. He refuses, doing it himself every single time. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it is certainly interesting. As for the game itself, the Mariners got out to a rip-roaring start, with J-Rod crushing a 3-run home run in the first to set the tone. And while Toronto would battle back to tie this one on that aforementioned Lucas single in the second, that would be their last offensive outburst of the night, being blanked for the next 2 frames before the Mariners pulled ahead on a Jorge Polanco dinger to right center, the switch hitter's seemingly 1,000th clutch hit of the postseason so far. They would tack on 4 more runs before this one was over, with Emerson Hancock retiring George Springer on a double play ball to make a 10-3 victory official, putting the M's firmly in the driver's seat for their first ever World Series appearance, now up 2-0. I made a video a little while ago where I discussed this at-bat during a Giants-Phillies game, when an umpire missed 3 separate strike 3 calls that would have ended a key moment. But, at least you could put part of the blame on JT Realmuto's receiving, or the fact that they were at the edges of the zone. But you could not make the same claim about a plate appearance we just saw yesterday, as a batter got called out on strikes in a key moment in the game, despite seeing 6 balls. The Angels' second baseman, Luis Rengifo, was facing off against Mets closer Edwin Diaz in the top of the 8th inning, with 2 guys on. A base hit here could have changed the entire nature of this game with the score at 6-3. But that goal for Luis was immediately impeded when this pitch was called a strike to start his at-bat, despite it not even being close to the outer edge. The next one would miss just a little more outside for a ball, followed by a fastball that sailed high and another uncompetitive slider. This brought the count to 3-1, and the bases should have been loaded on the next pitch when Diaz again missed with the breaking ball. But somehow, someway, this, much like the first offering, got called a strike, despite the fact it wasn't even framed well. Keep in mind, Luis has only been walked 19 times all year. He's a free swinger, so the fact that he wasn't hacking at any of these should go to show how outside they were. At that point, there was nothing he could do besides dig back in and get ready for a 3-2. Which Diaz delivered, being another slider, again well outside the strike zone, and again somehow resulting in a called strike, this one ending the at-bat entirely. Immediately, manager Ray Montgomery stormed out of the dugout, getting, in my opinion, rightfully furious at how bad that at-bat went from a game-calling perspective, as home plate ump Eric Backus had managed to, in what almost felt like a cruel joke, turn a 6-ball at-bat into a backwards K, again, with none of them even being close to the corners. And this frustrated not only the Angels themselves, but their broadcasting crew, who had this reaction upon seeing that final call.
3-2, now the runners will go, and it's ball by call, strike, that's ridiculous!
It's very rare to hear somebody in the booth get that animated, but honestly, I'm not surprised given what had just transpired. The Angels would somewhat predictably go on to lose this ball game, cementing a sweep at the hands of the Mets, dropping them to 4 games under 500 as they desperately seek to cling to the edge of the wildcard picture. I made a video a little while back on the debut of MLB's first woman umpire, in Jen Pawol, partially because it felt wrong to ignore such a historic moment, and partially because I saw a lot of people dogging her online for a bad call to start her night when she ended up being overall pretty average. And her next appearance behind the plate would give further evidence to this, as she made 116 correct calls out of 125 chances, with an expected correct call rate of 116.8, this time essentially being exactly average. All these numbers are per umpire scorecards, by the way. But unfortunately, she just registered a performance in a game yesterday between the Angels and Twins that not only was one of the worst of the season, but one of the most biased you will ever see on a major league field. Things began roughly for Minnesota starter Zebby Matthews when he pinpointed a cutter on the low and outside corner to Yoan Moncada, an offering that should have made the count 0-2, but instead it was called ball 1. Moncada would end up singling later on in a 3-2 count. This offering would then be considered a miss to Zach Neto, but I'm going to skip past this one because of how poorly the catcher ended up presenting it. Neto, by the way, would end up being out on a sacrifice bunt. This brings us to, arguably, the most consequential missed call of the night, when Taylor Ward took a 3-2 slider over the high and outside corner. That was called a ball. This loaded the bases with just 1 out, and to make matters worse, Matthews would end up shortly after, retiring Chris Taylor on a shallow fly ball to right, meaning the inning already should have been over. Instead, Luis Rengifo would have a chance to get Anaheim out to a 2-0 lead when he singled. The deficit then grew even larger when Ward ended up scoring on a double steal. Pawol would go on to miss another 4 balls that should have been called strikes for Matthews, including, most notably, this 0-2 pitch on the inner half and this fastball almost a full ball length inside the zone. There would be a couple other misses afterwards, but none significant enough to highlight here. This was part of a night that featured 11 missed strikes for Minnesota and just 4 for the Angels. On the flip side, there would be 7 pitches that were out of the strike zone that were called, with 6 of them going against the Twins. The most consequential of this type being a called third to Johnny Pereda on what should have been a walk. When it was all said and done, Pawol had missed 20 overall calls in this contest. A high total for sure, but not necessarily extremely so. However, it's the next 2 metrics that inspired me to make this video, with her overall accuracy coming in at just 86.01%, the second worst of the year so far. And then, the big one, being the 2.48 runs gifted to the Angels, a mark almost half a run higher than the next closest. Was it the worst performance of all time? No, but it was easily one of the worst of the season, and an especially frustrating one for myself, who was obviously rooting for her to have success at the highest level. But that's going to come from performances much like her previous one, versus whatever the hell happened in the game yesterday. Also, I just want to say before this video ends, that when I say biased, I don't mean that Pawol was intentionally calling the game poorly against the Twins, just that the final result ended up being incredibly biased. Thanks. I've made a number of videos this season on horrible ball strike calls, from the worst called strike 3 ever that missed by over half a foot outside, to an immaculate inning being stolen on a pitch essentially right down the middle, to even a hitter taking 3 pitches nowhere close, yet still being rung up. But we just saw something yesterday that was unlike any one of these, because it was actually wholly unique in the advanced pitch tracking era. Zach Eflin delivered the first pitch of the inning to Ernie Clement, who faked as if he was going to bunt before pulling it back, taking a sinker that probably should have been called a strike. But at least it was borderline. It was then on the 1-0 that he took this pitch, another sinker, with this one being literally right down the middle. Yet it was called a ball somehow. I'm going to show you the slow-mo of that again. And it's not like catcher Adley Rutschman was crossed up or something, even if the pitch wasn't thrown exactly where he wanted it. And it was a fastball variation, so you can't blame it on crazy break or something. At first glance, this might look bad, but not necessarily feel original. But that wouldn't be correct to say. I looked up the offering's measurables, being where it came in on the Y and X axis, at 225 and negative 0.16 respectively, and then punched them into Baseball Savant's search, and came up with this result. That's right. There has never been a miss in that location before. Thankfully for Baltimore, this wouldn't end up meaning much, considering they would win this one by a final score of 11-4. But it still stands, in my opinion, as some of the best evidence of why the ABS system is 100% a requirement going forward. Now, before you leave, today's mini breakdown is going to be of Maikel Garcia getting stung by a bee yesterday, in a moment that I'm pretty sure all of us can relate to that was caught in slow motion. Just look at the size of that thing. That's honestly more like getting bit by an animal. How would Garcia respond? How about by crushing a grounder up the middle nearly immediately after, and then catching center fielder Michael Harris II sleeping, en route to registering a hustle double? What a badass moment from one of Kansas City's biggest breakout stars of 2025. In the ramp up to a major league player getting ejected, it's usually pretty safe to say that whatever they said to the ump to get them booted was pretty intense, or perhaps it was the way they said it. But unfortunately, unless there's a camera angle that allows somebody like John Boy to read their lips, it's not really possible to get an explanation beyond their body language. But today, in the final game of a hotly contested 3-game series between the Tigers and Cubs, we got to see exactly what a player said to get ejected, and it made the ump who threw him look completely ridiculous. Before we get into this further, shout out to Tanner Cox, who sent me an email asking me to detail this. Feel free to do the same if you ever witness a play that you want to see me break down, at the email address I give in the outro. Anyway, let's get to the game, which saw Detroit jump out to a 2-0 lead, courtesy of a first-inning 2 RBI double from Spencer Torkelson, a shot that just missed being a torque bomb. Both offenses would be pretty quiet for the next 4 frames, with the score remaining at 2-0 into the 5th, before Dansby Swanson lined a curveball into the left field corner, getting on second base with nobody out. This brought Nico Hoerner up, looking to at least get the runner to third. But on a 2-2 pitch, he would take a fastball well low and inside, only to see it be called strike 3. This obviously frustrated the righty, who turned to home plate ump Derek Thomas and said this. I'm confident when I say I have never bore witness to an ejection this soft before. No swear words, no personal attacks, not even a raised voice really, just some exasperated feedback. And yet he still got kicked from the game after Derek literally cost him an at-bat. Craig Counsell, the Cubs manager, would of course get himself kicked shortly after. This whole sequence would go on to be highly consequential, as the Cubs would strand that runner at second base. In the bottom of that same inning, Riley Green would slash a 2-run single to left field, pushing the Motor City Kitties' lead to 4-0, which would end up being our final score after Will Vest retired the side in order in the 9th inning, securing a series win for Detroit 2-1. I do, however, think things could have been far different if Hoerner hadn't had the bat taken out of his hands with a runner in scoring position in the 5th inning, only to then get ejected from the game, for what was, I do believe, the softest reason I've ever seen on a major league field. Exceptionally bad calls can still happen in Major League Baseball today, despite replay assistance existing, whether that be on a ridiculous ball strike call or some circumstantial instance where a team doesn't have a challenge. But I'm not sure if I've ever seen a blown call as bad as the other day when the umps in New York actually had time to get a play right with the assistance of replay review, yet they still somehow bungled it. The Blue Jays were facing the Royals, looking to maintain their hold over the AL East crown while continuing to pursue the best record in the American League. And they would get out to a fast start in this one, scoring 3 runs in the top of the second on some well-executed small ball and a double from George Springer. Casey would respond a couple frames later with a bases-loaded 2-out single off of rookie Trey Savage, who was making just his second career start, narrowing their lead to 1. However, like we've seen all year from them, Toronto wouldn't be kept down, with Vladdy Jr. crushing a 2-run double in the following frame, then Addison Barger tallying his own extra base hit. This brings us to our highlighted play, as following the leadoff single in the bottom of the 5th from Mike Yastrzemski, Bobby Witt Jr. lined a ball to center field, forcing Dalton Varsho to have to make an excellent diving catch, then throw to first for a double play. What an insane play, right? Or was it? Because, you see, the umpire in the field called this a trap play, meaning that Toronto would go from 2 out, nobody on, to 2 guys on with nobody out. This would be challenged by manager John Schneider, and for a moment it looked like a pretty obvious overturn. As you can see here from pretty much every angle that, as he dives to grab it, the ball never leaves his mitt, and never touches the grass when he doesn't have control over it. This is as easy of an overturn as you'll ever see, as it felt like you'd have to try to come up with reasons not to do so. But I guess the guys in New York did just that, because after the review process concluded, they somehow upheld the call, leading to this downright baffled reaction from Varsho. There was literally nothing about this play that made it close. The evidence was clear and convincing, yet they still didn't make the right call. I also want you to listen to both announcers addressing the play as well.
Did he catch this? Looked like it there. Yeah, I mean, he had it in his glove the whole way.
And it's obviously going to be very close, but he caught it. Yeah, he sure did.
What a play.
He definitely caught it.
The call on the field stands. No catch.
Oh, wow.
Toronto loses their challenge.
That's
My goodness.
absolutely terrible. You can see Barsha's reaction.
And for a moment, it looked like it might have a pretty severe impact on the game, as following the departure of Savage, Brendan Little would give up back-to-back RBI singles to cut Toronto's lead down to 2, before mercifully Adam Frazier would line into a double play. Things grew even closer in the 6th when Jack Caglione hit the first triple of his big league career, before being driven in by Randall Grichuk. A fantastic diving catch from Nathan Lucas would then save a leadoff double in the 7th, a play that perhaps gave Toronto back some momentum, as they would manage to tack on an important 2 runs of insurance in the 8th inning after a single from Ernie Clement and triple from Andres Gimenez. And that was that. The Blue Jays clinched a postseason berth while maintaining their 2-game lead over the Yankees in the East. Though since they claimed the season series, it's actually more like 3 games. This means that, barring some kind of epic collapse, they will, more than likely, soon wrap up their first division title since 2015.
Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.